Sanse. I'm Carol Rose GoldenEagle, and I am so thrilled today to be introducing you to the latest work of John McDonald. Kitotam is a beautiful book of poetry, really strong imagery in the writing of this, a lot of narrative about memories, some of them that are harsh, some of them that see a young man going through a tremendous amount of racism and being disconnected with our beautiful indigenous culture. And we're proud to share some of that work with you today. John, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm coming to you from my ancestral territory of Treaty 6 territory, Kistapinanik, along the shores of the North Saskatchewan River in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan.
Oh, Prince Albert. No, just because you've written some things about Prince Albert that are maybe less than, kind in terms of some of your childhood memories. But we'll talk about that in a bit. In case you are not familiar with John's work, he has a wonderful body of short stories and poetry, and he's Nahewak as well as Métis, a multidisciplinary writer from Prince Albert, as he just mentioned, although he also has roots with the Muskeg Lake Cree Nation and Mistawasis Nahewak. He is the great grandson of Chief Mistawasis of the Plains Cree and famed Métis leader Jim Brady. John's writing and artwork are very well known. They've been displayed, his artwork, at various locations, and he's had publications. And the latest, as we said, from Radiant Press is this book of poetry. So I guess I'll ask, first of all, how long were you working on this? It seems like there's a tie-in between all of the past, present, and future in what the reader is able to digest with this collection. So tell me about that.
This book is many years in the making. The poetry in this book, some of it goes back over 25 years. A lot of the words, the actual poetry started out as spoken word poetry, performance art poetry, and it's been the poems that are in this book. They go back to some of them to my teen years. The memories go back well into my childhood. And but the actual poems in this book, some of them go back quite a ways. We're going back into the 90s with some of these works.
There's a lot of stories in here about displacement, about anger, teenage angst, and you are no longer a teenager.
No,
How
unfortunately not.
how have you worked through that in terms of coming to terms with having less and having to face discrimination and just all the stories that you tell with your early poems? How did you manage to get to where you are today?
I managed to get where I'm at today with a lot of support and a lot of people believing in me. I grew up in the West Flat of Prince Albert. It's basically it's the projects, it's the hood. It's it is a very, for a lot of people, it's a very negative place. That being said, I'm very proud that I'm a West Flat kid. My first 14 years of my life were spent within that few kilometer radius of the West Flat. Even being in, when I was in residential school, I was in residential school from 1984 to 1989 at the Prince Albert Indian Student Residence. That residential school overlooks the West Flat. So the strength, the resiliency that I learned growing up in that environment, and the people I met along the way, in terms of people who were there to support me. There were many people who took a chance on this. At one time, a skinny, scrawny little this kid that was, my entire world was was the West Flat. My entire world was the project. My entire world was this part of PA. I never saw a way out of that. But there were people who saw something in me and supported that and gave me a chance and took a big chance on me. And if it wasn't for the people who helped me out, there's a pretty good chance I wouldn't be here today.
There's a lot of darkness and despair in some of the pieces you've written, and given what you just said, it seems like the perfect time for you to do a reading. I really love For Bernice. And tell me a little bit about Bernice before you read the poem.
Bernice, For Bernice is written about the late Bernice Sais. Bernice in the city of Prince Albert is almost a mythological figure. She was Mama Bear. She took care of there for 25 years. There was not a committee or an organization that Bernice did not sit on or found. Bernice sat on the chair, with the anti-racism committee. Bernice was one of the founders, was on the board of the Prince Albert Indian Métis Friendship Center, the Prince Albert Winter Festival, the Prince Albert Food Bank, PA Outreach Program, Wansco Cultural School, the Women's Shelter, PAG, and goes on and on and on. Bernice was a very strong supporter of everybody. We called her Mama Bear for a reason. She was honored that. She was everybody. We were all her cubs. She was, if you were a street kid and you were in her circle and you went to her for help, she would help you. And Bernice was, I've yet to meet anybody who can come up to, who can meet the standard Bernice set in terms of her dealing with issues, supporting people with issues, and being really there for the people. And it wasn't, and she passed away going on just about 15 years now. She's been gone, and her loss is still felt. Bernice was so organized. She actually planned her own funeral. And she was literally planning and making sure people were taken care of right to the very end. And she was awarded the Prince Albert Citizen of the Year. And I was honored to speak at that event when they inducted her when she became a Citizen of the Year. The first thing I said was, Bernice saved my life. And because if it wasn't for Bernice for sitting on those committees and setting up some of the organizations that I accessed as a youth, no, I wouldn't be here. And when she passed away, the family honored me by asking me to sing her at her funeral with my hand drum, and to sing her honor song for her. So I'll read the poem that I wrote. This piece I got to perform. One of Bernice's greatest legacies is something called Voices of the North. And Voices of the North is a yearly country music, indigenous music festival that happens during the Prince Albert Winter Festival here in Prince Albert. And she handed the reins of that over to Cheryl Kimberly, and Cheryl asked me to perform this piece at the Voices of the North. For Bernice. We were street kids, disposable urchins not worth the time, immature hooligan bastards with no respect, except to her. We were vagrants, homeless leeches not worth the effort, drains on society. You should go get a job, except to her. We were Indians, decimated and ignorant races, not worth the welfare checks, drunken stereotypes who should go back to the res, except to her. We were abused women, terrible mothers who should have known better, or should have been better wives, or they wouldn't have been hit, except to her. We were hungry, lazy bums who can't afford to put food on their table, always looking for a handout, except to her. We were inmates, criminal monsters who should be locked up forever and kept away from the decent and good people, except to her. We were the addicted, diseased junkies who deserve what they get. Drug-pushing monsters who make the streets unsafe, except to her. We were prostitutes, whores, and loose women who are filthy and slutty, who sell their bodies to whomever comes along, except to her. The fragile ones in Prince Albert's shadows, the dirty little secrets, the sordid characters of this gateway to the north. To us, she was Mama Bear, our voice, our defender, our war chief, sometimes our last link to whatever makes us human beings. Sometimes our last link to life itself. We are the chorus, the multitudes of street people and brown people and beaten people, of young people and poor people and hungry people, of people behind bars and people hiding behind bedroom doors and people trading this for that. But we are people. And she knew that. And she never let us forget that, because she never forgot. She gave life to Shauna, Mike, and James, but she saved so many more. She sacrificed herself, worked her body and spirit to the end for us. Not because she had to, but because others wouldn't. There are those among us who should not be here, not with the cards life dealt to them. But they are here because she didn't fold, but went all in for them. I should know. I'm one of them.
So I have to say, Bernice, thank you. And thank you for writing that beautiful honor in her name. I actually, when I read that one, you made me cry, which is why I wanted to have you read it to us. And I love the fact that you're not reading poetry, you're expressing emotion. And that's a lot of what goes on in this latest collection. Other than telling the story of Bernice, you also tell the story of real people. I think about that terrible accident where Michelle Sarita passed away and Michael Green, as well as other individuals. You talk about Tristan DeRoche, the fiddler, and his effort to bring attention to that terrible crisis of suicide in northern Saskatchewan. Really honorable that such a young man would take that step. And Leonard Cohen and what he meant to you. So I just want to ask a bit about including poetry of real people like that and how they influenced you. How did that come to you? Were you lying in bed one night or walking your dog, or what inspired you to write these beautiful pieces of poetry?
I am inspired by the world around me. I know it sounds kind of cliche, but I'm inspired by everyday surroundings. As part of one of the many roles that I've been gifted is to be a storyteller. And the words I write, the words that I put onto the paper, I never go anywhere without a pen and paper. And I observe, I watch. It's something that being a street kid, you you learn to read a room, you learn to read a person, and that street sense you can never turn off. You can never turn that off. It's been, how many years? I just turned 40 this year, and I'm going into 25 years of sobriety this year, and being off the streets since I was 20 years old. So in that 20 years time, I still haven't yet to be able to turn off that street sense. And so being observant about the world around me, watching and talking to people, listening. I was very honored when I began my journey back onto the Red Road that I had access to people who would share stories and who would talk. And I would listen to everybody. I would, listening to, people who are very educated individuals and sitting on the riverbank talking to a guy who's taking a pull off a Listerine bottle. It's, those are stories, those are individuals, and listening to those tales. And a lot of what I share, part of that gift is I hopefully can share the stories for those who either feel they cannot share for themselves or are no longer here to share those stories. And that's part of the medicine I carry is taking those stories, those words, and making sure that those people are never forgotten. Those stories are never forgotten.
It was lovely. Having said that, I am just wondering also about sort of the way you set up the collections. Some of the poems are short and seem like poems, telling a story, of course. And then other ones like For Miguel, I Need My Glasses Because I Can't See, Miscellaneous Tape, I think it says 1993. And there's another one that I had in mind. But yeah, the use of storytelling, Whistling at the Northern Lights. So I'm wondering about the way you structure your work, because as I said, some of the pieces are quite, short. They're smaller pieces, and then some of them are almost like a short story. So how do people respond to you? Because a lot of folks have this idea that a poem is something that has a certain number of lines, and so how do you get around mixing it up, and how does that make you feel as the writer?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, these poems are all performance art based. My background as a poet is as a spoken word artist. I come from a background of free verse beat poetry, so my delivery style is very performance art based, very beat poetry based. So for me, there's a few poems in here where I've tried to do that iambic pentameter and that and it just doesn't really flow, and that's the one thing. And it almost, when I write, I try to put myself in that position where I'm having a conversation with somebody and thinking about that, sitting around talking with people and sitting, what makes the most what is going to leave the most impact, and how are people going to be able to relate? And George Carlin once said, more people write poetry than buy poetry. there are more people or something along those lines. More people write poetry than buy it. And so, or I think it was read it maybe. And so I always want to make a book where I want people to be able to read my poems and then read it again, and maybe go back and find something they didn't understand. And with that performance, because these poems have had the ability to be performed on stage, a lot of them I've been lucky enough to share in front of an audience, getting that feedback. Okay, when I read this line this way, did it cause the emotion? Did it cause the feeling I was trying to affect? And if it didn't, how can I change it? And the longer prose pieces, actually, that came from Erica Violet Lee, one of the writers or the editors who who did the editing on this book, that was something she zeroed in on right away was, hey, these longer prose pieces, if you structure them like this, they're more effective. And those were with Mixtape 93 and with Miguel, those are autobiographical pieces that were originally performance art based. I'm talking, when I do performance art, it's usually with costume, in character, a guy and a spotlight, basically a one-man monologue on stage. And so to ensure that continued into the book, that feeling went into the book, I left them, basically I took them right from the Word document that I would print off and take on stage with me, and it just went straight into the manuscript like that.
I loved it. It was really effective because it was unpredictable for the reader. And I thought it was great. The other thing is I laughed when I was reading one of your pieces called On Language, because I have those exact same thoughts, and I would like you to share that with us as well.
All right. In one thing I've always kind of understood is, being an Indigenous person, I understand that the language that comes out of my mouth, the words I put on, these are borrowed words. This is a borrowed language that was kind of imposed, and I always say this was a language we took it from the fort, and it's what we're kind of how we have to use it. And it's something that, while it is a sign, the fact that we're speaking English and that this is an English written book, that I no longer have that connection to my ancestral language, that circle has been broken. Coming to terms with that, and the trying to juxtapose that with regaining one's culture, it's a love-hate relationship, I guess. It's something where, in order to be able to use this gift and to make sure that the medicine of the words can affect the people it needs to affect, you kind of have to rectify that within yourself and take responsibility for what you say. And that's one, coming from watching elders speak, I've often said, if you watch an elder, they'll say something, there's this long, pregnant pause, and then they'll say something else. Another long, pregnant pause. And what that elder is doing is they are thinking about every single word that's coming out of their mouth, because they have to take responsibility for not only what they say, but the actions that it's going to affect how they say it. So for me, part of this poem is that same process of thinking about, how am I going to say it, and why do we say these things this way? Why do we phrase this way? And where did this all start? And I mentioned that where that connection originally starts in the poem. On language. Words stitched together in particular cadence, meant to be read in this particular way, be it out loud or or silently in your head. It is odd that so much of these various combinations of 26 letters of the English language are manipulated to increase emotional connectivity. And what of all those words birthed upon lined sheets of paper or pixelated computer screens, the words that do not meet requirements and are torn from coil ring binders, or select all, delete, eradicated from existence, their only crime having been not a good enough combination of those 26 letters. These are those combinations compiled like a spoonful of alphabet soup, or tiles from a Scrabble board, joined, married, consecrated, these straight lines, curlicues, whirls, swirls, and dots, a ciphered code. There's more than a few of us first taught this code, sitting in front of television screens as Big Bird and Grover, Bert and Ernie indoctrinated us into this cult of mysteries and taught us the incantation, that sacred song of knowledge. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. Those hieroglyphics we stared at from our school desk as they hung upon the walls, written in chalk at the very top of the blackboard. Letters, vowels, and consonants, the dying art of words being slaughtered by abbreviated phrases like Huxley's Brave New World, this new speak with its LOLs and OMGs, and with a generation that cannot write in cursive and cannot read anything handwritten. What would Big Bird say if he could see us now?
That's so wonderful. Hey, with that, the name, Kitotam, how did you decide on this as a name that you wanted for this collection?
So, Kitotam, I was talking to one of my aunts. I'm very fortunate that I still have an aunt who is a fluent Cree speaker. And I was talking to, she's one of the very few people that I'm able to, while I no longer possess conversational Cree, I can still, converse somewhat in Cree, this kind of broken Cree English. I still have that ability to speak with her in that way. And it's kind of interesting. It's one of the times where I find myself I do the code switching where I've got the non-indigenous sounding voice, the professional sounding voice, but when I'm around that auntie, that it's gone, and I'm like I'm back on, like I'm never left the res. This accent comes out when I talk with her, and I was explaining to her kind of what I was doing with terms of writing, and I said, how would you say that if somebody when they're talking about something, when they're trying to describe something, and that's what she said, Kitotam, they're speaking about it, they're speaking to it. So that's where the title came from.
I love it. I love it when writers, even if you're not fluent, Indigenous writers honor our language, even if we aren't, fluent either written or spoken word. You make political commentary in some of your pieces as well, and I could see all sorts of people when I read Why Do I Do What I Do? So tell me a little bit about why you wrote that, and then I would like you to read that piece.
Um, by virtue of, I don't want to say birthright, but where I kind of ended up in the cosmic scheme of things, I come from a very political family. I'm the as you mentioned, I'm the great grandson of Chief Mistawasis, the first chief to sign Treaty 6 in 1876. My grandfather, my biological grandfather, was Métis political leader Jim Brady. And being Jim Brady's grandson, he was a political leader in the 1920s and 1930s in Métis politics, and he's well regarded in Métis political circles. And he was somebody who was he was a self-educated man who was doing the best he could for our people and tried his very best to make sure that that the rights and the lives of Métis people, of Indigenous people, were never forgotten. In my role, when you're a guy named John A. McDonald, if you're an Indigenous guy named John A. McDonald, it's kind of you're the role. Even if you don't want to be a political person, you have to be. You got no. You can't walk away from it. You have to. It's what it's part of who you are. You can't. Part of it doesn't. You don't choose it. It chooses you. And part of what that is is sometimes you do have to call out people um, on certain things. Being an Indigenous male, one of the things is if breaking colonial misogyny, breaking colonial misconceptions, and having the ability to say, as an Indigenous male, hey, we can do better than this. We can be better than this. This is not tradition. What you're passing off as tradition, what you're passing off as protocol. Think about it before you say something. Think about with your actions, and you're holding up that mirror to people, and it can get you. You get painted either as a traitor. I don't know how many times I've been called an apple in my life. Um, you know, uh, being called horrible, horrible things, and being facing a lot of lateral violence, and it's part of what that medicine brings. It's part of the sacrifice. It's part of a flesh offering of the mind when you're holding up that mirror to somebody and calling out, not even calling out people on what they're doing, but just ma- keeping people responsible and making sure that keeping people accountable for their actions. I just gotta find it for a second here. Sorry, this is the first time I've actually held the physical book in my hand. So
That's okay. While you're looking for it, I'm also going to say that I was talking to my daughter last night about this collection, and she was saying, well, what's it about? So we had a discussion, and I'm just so happy that after I speak with you, I'm handing it over to her because Nahani said I would love to read that. So way to go. Anyway,
right on.
anytime you're ready,
All
you
right.
can start reading.
Why I do what I do. We need to keep holding up that mirror to those people who are willing to further themselves at the expense of others. If they break that mirror, they've done nothing but take one mirror and turn it into thousands of little mirrors. Either they change or they prove themselves liars for denying what is reflected. This is the medicine of the looking glass.
It's such a short piece, but it says so much. So thank you for reading it. And again, just congratulations. It's a beautiful collection. And I will just make a commentary that I think it comes to a perfect end in terms of what we're reading because the tag is the last poem. And your very last line is, this is my mark. I was here. So just tell us a little bit about that before we say to all of our readers that you must go out and get a copy of this.
Um, you mean speak about the poem, The Tag?
Yeah.
Okay. As an artist, as a visual artist, I my art often gets called quote unquote lowbrow art. Um, Highbrow art is the academic stuff, the landscapes, the portraits, the stuff that gets taught in universities and the fine museums. Lowbrow art often gets, the label of lowbrow art goes to tattoo art, graffiti art, comic book art, the stuff that you used to put on album covers, and it is often derided in the art scene. Well, it was for a long time. It was kind of considered vandalism, and it was considered garbage. It was never recognized as an art form. Um, but in context, it is something that we as human beings have done for thousands of years. There are caves in France where people have gone deep into caves, far from where any human has access to on a regular basis, and they've put their marks on the wall. And you go to France, it's there. You go into Africa, it's there. You go into Australia, the caves have cave paintings that are tens of thousands of years old. Here in Saskatchewan, you go down the Churchill River and you see those marks on the walls. And you fast forward to this time, you look at train cars, you look at the undersides of bridges, you look at phone boxes, wherever, and it's the same thing. It is somebody leaving their mark. It is somebody saying, I was here. And if that, there's a reason why a lot of graffiti art is somebody's name. It's somebody's, either their tag or their nickname. It's their name. It's leaving their mark. And I'm very proud of all the artists who I've had an opportunity to work with over the years, who have brought graffiti art, that street art, to the forefront, and worked very hard to have it recognized as not just vandalism. It is an actual art form. And for anybody who's ever tried to use a spray paint can, you know, it may look like scribbles on it. I challenge anybody to try. I challenge anybody to try spray anything with the spray paint can. It takes a certain knowledge, it takes a certain skill, it takes a certain adeptness, and it's also, if you think about it, you look at those train cars, a lot of those are done at night in the dark with maybe a headlight if you're lucky, and ready to run at a minute's notice. Now, that being said, I'm not condoning going into the train yard. That's the caveat. But you know, it takes a certain amount of skill. And what I want to capture in this piece was that recognition that it is just, you know, it's a continuation of what we as people have been doing since time immemorial. That marking where we've been, that recognition. I was here. So,
That's lovely.
Did you want me to read it?
If you'd like, that would be fine.
The tag. Paint can rattles in the train yard night, hissing metal snakes spitting venom on cold rounded steel. My finger drips solid black, spattering the blood of the can in quick, measured strokes. Curled random shapes 20 feet long, multicolored chaos tied together with ribbons of black enamel. The hairs in my nostrils stiff from the fumes like cold air on a winter's day. What color will my snot be tomorrow? Solid masses splattered, oblong distorted lettering scrawled across the belly of the train car, thrown quickly, one step ahead of the cops, ready to drop and leave behind unfinished epitaphs that will say nothing. Need to finish, bend my back to reach the bottom, rattle, rattle. The can in my hand, agitator in can, agitator on steel train car sides, gawked at by those waiting at crossing signals, watching the work, mine, his, hers, theirs, rolling past, muttering that they can't read what it says. But they all say the same thing. I was here. This is my mark. I was here.
Oh, thank you for that. And with that, I will say Kinenatskamatin. Thank you for spending time with us. And John, best of luck with this. It's a beautiful collection. And once again, congratulations on getting this body of work out.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you for sharing this time with me. And thank you to Radiant Press for all the work they've done. Thank you to Erica Violet Lee and Linda Monahan, the editors. Thank you to John and Deborah at Radiant Press for all their work. And thank you for hosting this. I appreciate it. Acknowledge them. Thank you for sharing your gifts too.